Hello friends, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm finally recording my second podcast. I'm very sorry, I know that it's been almost a month since I filmed my last podcast, and I'm really gonna try to stop with the ums and pauses because it's really gonna save me time when I'm editing this. Maybe you all don't mind too much, but when I listen back to myself, I fucking hate it. As I'm recording this, I am letting my hair soak in a oil that I just bought tonight, and it came in like a few hours ago, or not even a few hours ago. It literally came in within the past hour. And so I'm letting it sit in my hair for an hour. I thought this was the perfect time to get up off my ass and record my podcast and stop waiting for it to just happen. I've been trying to think in this mentality more because I've been listening to a lot of Mel Robbins' podcast during work and during my drives home from work, and she really emphasizes like nobody is gonna achieve your goals for you, nobody's gonna do shit for you. If you want to see it happen, if you want to live a certain reality, you get up and make it happen. And I've been trying to implement her 5-second rule as well to make sure that I'm being as productive as I can be. I don't know how else to explain it. I've just been feeling really good ever since listening to podcast and really exercising the advice that she gives to people on her podcast. So, with that being said, I'm going to address a couple comments from my last podcast and then I will get into today's topic. So, a lovely user from my last podcast commented that they would love to be part of my journey, and then they also complimented me on my voice, which I just want to say thank you so much. That actually really does genuinely mean a lot to me because I have been told that in the past, and I'm someone who likes to talk a lot too, and I've been told my voice is very soothing, and it's one of the reasons as well that I wanted to start a podcast so that you all who like to listen to me blabber on can just put me on as background noise or actually listen to some of the stuff I'm talking about. Regardless, I'm just glad that you're here with me and listening to me talk about my experiences and just share information like we're two friends. This person also asked which college I went to, and I don't know how private I am, but for privacy reasons, I'm just gonna leave that information open to people who already kind of know me in real life or know me on a certain level, that they would know that. Maybe I'll share it later on in the future. All I'll say right now is that I went to college in the Midwest. I'm from Minnesota. It was a small liberal arts school, and that's how much I'll say. And I hope that that's enough information for you. The expectation for today's podcast is to have a part two of the discussion on friendships in college and in high school. Today, I want to focus on college, but I think that I don't want to make it as extensive as I intended it to be. When I sit down and really think about my college friendships, there are so many mini stories to tell, but today we're going to keep it a very general overview. And we're gonna start that by talking about the phenomenon that is known as your first freshman friend group. And if you have had experience if you've spent some time in post secondary education or, you know, um, anything similar, right? Like you have very likely experienced your first friend group that you come across in college, and we all know how those friend groups are. You guys are like glued by the hip, and you just everyone does everything together. You have your meals together, you go to the gym together, you go on walks together, you spend your weekends together, you're studying together, etc. And in the very beginning, these friend groups can be really amazing, and some of them you find some people in that group you find to be lifelong friends. And sometimes, right, like it can be a beautiful things. Other times, it can be a fucking nightmare, especially if a lot of those friends that are in your freshman friend group are dating each other. And that leads me into my little podcast story because that's what happened in my friend group. So I was actually introduced to my first friend group in college by my then ex. He was, I wouldn't say a social butterfly, but he was trying to recreate his identity on campus and be just a completely different person than who he was when he was in high school. And I'm not just going out on a limb and saying these things, it's literally because I have information on him. Because we were dating, right? So he was trying to recreate himself because he had read a self-help book prior to coming to college, and that guided him on like, right, like body language and how to act. And he ate that shit up, and he like word for word would use these tactics to like become a completely different person. So that's a long way of saying I wouldn't call him a social butterfly, but he did introduce me to my first friend group and some friends that I am still very close with, that I love and care about very much to this day. I would say I would call myself a social butterfly. But like, I was in a completely different environment. I was coming out of high school already being somebody who, and this is not me bragging, but I was coming out of high school already being someone who was known and was seen and had a good friend group, had a good foundation. There were people at my high school that knew me and I didn't know who they were, and they would say hi to me. And so that's a little insight into my high school background in terms of like social life, if that's how I would, yeah, that's how I would put it. But I said I would stop saying yeah, so I met my friend group on a weekend night, I believe. And prior to this meeting them in person on campus, I was actually added to a Snapchat group where they all were pretty hesitant, I think, about like me into the friend group because my then ex had just like, if I remember correctly, he had just added me to the group and was like, "Oh, hey, this is Maggie." Right? So they didn't know anything about me. He didn't tell them that, well, I don't think he told them that I was his girlfriend. Maybe he did. But I don't know that much. All I know is that the energy was a little bit tense when I had met them for the first time, but gradually, like, it was all kind of a blur. We all started getting along. And like I said before, right, like with the freshman friend group, we were doing everything together. We were having brunches together on the weekend. We were cooking together, which was, I would say, a better highlight of the friend group. I love to cook with friends. I love cooking for my friends. It's my biggest love language. I just, if I know that I love you, if I know that I care about you, the number one thing I want is I want to know that you're eating well, even if I'm not the one like cooking for you, right? But that was a better memory. Anyways, we would study together. We did everything together. When I say everything, I mean everything. And it got so bad that like I was literally failing some of my classes my freshman year because I was hanging out with them too much, because studying with them wasn't actually studying with them. Studying with them was messing around, procrastinating. It wasn't a good time sometimes, academically at least. So I found myself in a position where I had to pull back a little bit in order to get my shit together, which was, as like, I gotta put me first. I gotta put me first, because if I don't, I'm gonna fucking fail and I'm gonna drop out of college. And it's only my freshman year. And obviously, I feel like I was coming in as a I mean, I was a freshman before, like right before COVID hit, right? And so my freshman year got cut short, where we all didn't know if we were coming back. So I went to a trimester based school, and we didn't know if we were going to be back for spring term. And I mean, it ended up that we didn't end up coming back for spring term because of COVID, and we did a whole term. We did a whole term from home. And so this was a really strange time, and it was a big change for all of us. And so our friend group transitioned to Zoom calls and playing Jack in the Box online together. And I wouldn't say our calls were super scheduled, or like we didn't, it wasn't like a weekly or like bi-weekly schedule, but we just like, if people were free, we would hit each other up in the group chat and be like, hey, do you want to hop on a call or whatever. At this point, I want to say that there were two couples in our friend group, and like maybe one or two growing in addition to that. I don't really know how I want to talk about couples and budding relationships, romantic relationships that happen in friend groups, because I feel like I have yet to be in a position where I'm like on the outside looking in, because I feel like when all of these relationships were happening, I was I was actively contributing to it, if that makes sense. That's really just to say that this podcast at this point would be a really good time for me to have like a guest speaker on, someone from my friend group. It makes me really think of my friend Jeremy Fong, and how I would love to have him on one of my podcasts at some point. And I think that would be really exciting, because then we could just shit talk people and really unpack our college experience. But back to the point, it was strange, and during COVID, I believe that one couple, or like two of our friends, ended up taking a gap year where they just stayed home. And we had one friend, we're gonna name him Michael in this podcast. He was from Korea, and he was actually set to go and do military duty for 2 years. And so he took this, right, like COVID time as an opportunity to get those 2 years done, which meant that when we were seniors, he would be coming back on campus as a sophomore. So he wouldn't be graduating with us. But they both took a gap year at the same time, this couple, and they did long distance. And luckily, I think that they were in the same time zone, I think. But I believe that they were in two different countries, so that was hard. So it's like having to deal with that long distance and then also COVID. So that was a rough time. When we ended up coming back as sophomores, it was tough, because some classes were hybrid, some classes were completely online, some classes were in person where you had to wear a mask and social distance. It was just it's a really weird time. I think that I saw this girl on TikTok talk about like the pandemic pause, or the pandemic gap, for like I would say like Gen Z generation, right? Like Gen Z really having like a mental like age lag, because the pandemic disrupted that for us. And essentially I'm trying to say that it sucked a lot, and many things happened. In my sophomore year, I ended up breaking up with my ex. That is a podcast in itself that I could talk about, because there are so many layers to it, and it ended up disrupting the whole friend group as a whole. And like I said before, I think there was good reason that it did, because it was just a fucking mess. And I think that when you have that many relationships in a initial freshman friend group, there's no way that it's not going to disrupt the friend group. I remember him asking me, I'm not even going to give him a name because he's not important. The fact that I'm even talking about him is, yeah. But yeah, this is my story. This is my narrative. This is my truth. Yeah. So, what was I saying? I totally forgot now. Oh, I remember. So, when we were in the midst of our breakup, he's the kind of guy who like beats around the bush. And I also want to touch on like horoscopes and astrology at some point, because I would say that up to this point, most of my romantic relationships and interactions have been with Pisces men. And I'm now understanding that it's because I'm a Virgo rising that I attract Pisces men. I spoke with my astrologer about this, and she confirmed that this was the reason as well. But there's just something about Pisces men and just beating around the bush. Like, bitch, just tell me how it is, and we can solve the problem right now. He was very walking around the truth. Didn't want to say that he was breaking up with me, but said like, yeah, like maybe like I want to take a break because we're doing like right, we were doing long distance for a little during the pandemic, and then we did long distance again because I kind of had a falling out with a roommate that I had at the time. So I took a term at home, and would like, I mean, I still made an effort to see him, right? Like I was still driving down to campus to see him and spend like a night or a weekend with him. He was busy partying, wanting to spend time with friends. But anyways, there I go again, not actually telling you what I was gonna tell you. I just feel like I need to give you backstory. But I remember him asking me, like, well, like if we break up, like who gets the friend group? And I just want to take a pause because that was the friend group. Like I love my friends, but the friend group at that point was like the least of my concerns. So it was just absolutely absurd to me that he was even asking such a dumb question. And I just remember looking at him like in disbelief, and I'm like, why does it matter though? Like the friends, our friends are going to do what they want to do because they're their own people, and they are all strong and independent and capable of making their own decisions. So why are we acting like we're fucking divorcing and like we're trying to fight for custody for like our quote unquote children, right? Like, so that's basically what I said to him. I was like, the friends are gonna do what they want to do. And what did they do? They never, I don't think our friends ever actually chose. They kind of just, right, like I said, they did what they did. But in the end, we all were super tight, and my ex kind of removed himself. And I think that it was honestly out of shame because I found out right after we broke up that he was actually trying to sleep with one of our mutual friends. But like I said again, like that's a whole story in itself. If you want to hear about that story specifically, like this video or leave a comment down below or subscribe. Haha. Yeah, so now that we're off of that little side quest, our freshman friend group was still kind of going strong. Like I said, Michael was in Korea. He was serving military duty. He was doing military duty. Um, and his girlfriend was back over there as well in a different country, still same time zone. They were trying to make it work. Junior year, I had like a temporary glow up, but I think it was like out of spite glow up. Although I was still living my good life, I think that my host stories also are going to have a podcast of their own as well because there are just so many things that would just be so exciting, and I want to do that podcast with my friend Nectary. I don't know if she listens to my podcast, but I'm going to try to get her on because talking to her is always such a fun time. Like, especially when it's her, me, and Jeremy, like talking. It's a great time. I think that I get dogged by them. They're my air sign lovers. I've said in a TikTok before that it's always been the air signs in my life that have been the voice of reason for my emotional ass. I'm a Scorpio. If you're listening this far, you should comment down below with your what your zodiac sign is because I would love to know. I yeah, was living my best life in junior year, and then later into our year, we find out that Michael is breaking up with his girlfriend, and at this point, she is back on campus with us already this year, just one grade behind. I forgot what name I agreed on with myself to name her, but we're just gonna say that she was Michael's girlfriend. And I remember that night very distinctly because I had gotten back from a quote unquote date. And I was supposed to go to like a party with this guy. But then I was like, oh fuck, like, actually, not an excuse, right? Like, my friend is actually going through something right now. Or like, so and so is, we knew Michael's girlfriend. We both knew her. So I was like, oh, Michael's girlfriend is going through something right now. Like, I think I want to be able to be there for her. So you go party alone, right? Like, no making moves tonight. No being a slut tonight for Maggie. But yeah, that was a very emotional time. And I think that's when
maybe at this point, like, our friend group was already kind of like falling apart and no one really hung out with each other anymore. But when that happened, it put a strain in the group for Michael as well, because then he was living his best life and then got a girlfriend and then came back for senior year. And that was a whole nother thing. I think by senior year, we were all, well, for me, I'll speak for myself. For me, it felt like it was all really forced. And I felt that even at that point, I was already kind of actively removing myself from things. Like, not because I didn't like spending time with them, but because I felt like at that point it just wasn't serving me a purpose anymore, or serving a purpose anymore. And I felt that I was wasting my energy more than anything else. I felt like I wasn't getting a lot out of the hangouts. It felt like we were just hanging out to hang out, to keep that connection, and I don't like those kind of connections. So I would say there are a few people from my freshman friend group that I had met that I'm still very good friends with. There other ones I'm not close with. Other ones I never want to see ever again. Uh yeah, that was super brief, super general. I feel like, not that they're not important to me, but I just don't feel the need to really go into detail with a lot of things that maybe did happen in the friend group. But that kind of wraps it up. I realize like I'm only at like maybe a 20-ish minute mark. So let's add on and talk a little bit more about, well, let's just talk more about my freshman year ex. As I mentioned earlier, my ex was not a social butterfly, but somebody who put on a mask and was trying to be someone that he wasn't as he entered college. And I think that ultimately made him a really big asshole. I think that I dated him because I saw his true, genuine self at the very beginning, but then that faded into somebody who was hyper focused on going to parties, being known by everyone on campus, having a lot of FOMO when it came to parties and hanging out with friends. And it got to the point where, like, he, in a way, I think, was experiencing being the center of attention, and it was such a huge leap from like what he'd experienced in high school that he was eating all of that shit up. Everybody knew his name. He, like, I remember once, like, he saw one of his friends when we were walking on campus, and then he like pulled his hand from mine because he didn't want to be seen holding my hand. And I'm like, what the fuck? Like, people on campus know that we're dating. I don't know why you would do that. So I would say there were a lot of red flags that I ignored. I think that I should have cut it off at the 3 month mark. I probably should have cut it off after that. I probably should have not even dated him because I remember getting a really sick feeling in my stomach when I realized that, like, I kind of started to like him. Moral of the story was Maggie shouldn't have dated that guy at all ever, period. But I will say it was a canon event, and I was naive, and I was 18 years old, and I wanted to experience having a boyfriend. I wanted to be in love. And prior to dating him, my only, like, I guess, like, intimate experience or interaction was with the guy that I lost my virginity to when I turned 18. And I will say my losing my virginity story will be a shorter podcast. It might go with my hoe podcast, right? The un spreading out or laying out my hoe story podcast. But it was a really good experience, and I think I got super lucky when I shared my first sexual experience with this guy. Back to my college ex, though. What a fucking asshole he turned out to be. He was very neglectful, especially as we hit sophomore year. He wanted to spend every weekend with his friends, wanted to do, like, they would do something called, like, drinners on Fridays, which was drunk dinners, which was honestly sounds fun initially, but then if you're doing it every fucking weekend, like what the fuck? It was just terrible. And then I remember one time like he smoked for the first time with one of his friends in his room, and he came down to my room and my roommate's room to try to like cuddle and stuff, and I was just like, ew. Like I don't like this version of you. I don't like who you're turning into, right? And in the second half of this friendship, or sorry, in the second half of my relationship with him, I developed a really bad, like, trigger warning. I'm going to be talking a little bit about eating disorders, so if that's something you're uncomfortable with, I would say to skip 2 minutes, 1 to 2 minutes ahead. But I developed a really bad binge eating disorder with him because I felt really neglected, and I felt that the only way to fill whatever void that I was feeling emotionally was to eat a lot of food and eat food that I thought tasted good and would fill me up. And it was a really depressing time in my life, and I spent a lot of time crying about everything, and I gained so much weight. I was on Nexplanon too, and it was just fucking with my hormones, and yeah, it was a really dark time in my life. I remember like we would have, or I would want to have countless conversations with him about like how I felt and how I wanted things to change, and he'd be like, yeah, yeah, like I'll change, but then nothing ever changed. And I think that also stems from me being an avoid, or not an avoidant, sorry, and having an anxious attachment style, and that's something that I've slowly been learning to kind of navigate. I think after my relationship with him, I had developed kind of like an avoidant attachment style, or more so like maybe an avoidant style. And that was a whole mess in itself, but it was really rough. And we hit a point where we just could not see eye to eye on anything. And then I was set to go to Japan for a study abroad program, and he was going to go to London for a different abroad program, like the term after. So like for me, I was supposed to go abroad in the fall, and then when I got back, he would be going to London. So it was like it would have been like another full maybe like 6 7 months of like long distance, and he couldn't do it. And I think it wasn't that he couldn't do it, but it was because he started to feel trapped, and he was, I know his eyes were wandering, and like he thought that he could get it with any girl on campus. But guess who pulled zero bitches after we broke up? Him. Like, he got a big head, I think, while, like, towards the end of our relationship and after our relationship, because he couldn't pull anyone that he thought he could pull while we were together. And if it's one thing about a man, I don't remember who says this, but it's just in our nature to want something that is already like has already been claimed, right? Like so for a guy to have like a girlfriend, that makes him more attractive to other girls because it's like, well, he can pull, or like he does have a girlfriend, so that makes you desirable in some sort of way. I don't know if that makes sense. You can tell me. But that's essentially how it was. And as I mentioned before, it was really like a dog chasing its own tail, or like beating around the bush when he was trying to break up with me. He was really vague about it and was like, "Oh, well, like I want to take a break, but also like I want to break up." And I was like, I personally, I'm not the kind of girl to, or just not the type of person, period, to do the whole like taking a break thing and then like going off of like a don't ask, don't tell rule. Like I don't do that. And I'm like, if you want to break up, we're breaking it up. And that's the cutoff point, like I'm not gonna sit around waiting, letting you experience other girls, letting you sleep around with other girls, and then for you to be able to come back to me and be like, oh, okay, like I've decided that I want you now, right? Um, Fuck Pisces men. But I look like Boo Boo the Fool because I ended up dating a Pisces man a year after breaking up with this person. But overall in that relationship, I would say that what I got out of it was that I I got used. Like because I remember just laying in bed with him once and he told me that like all I really was to him was like a safe space to come back to, like a foundation to come back to after he was able to like hang out with all his friends and party and do what he wanted to. And so I was like, "Oh, so like I basically am just like a home to you, like that you can fall back." I don't want to be that because it's not a relationship built off of reciprocity, right? Like you're kind of just like you're taking everything from me. You don't want to do anything for me. You just want to like reap all of the benefits and put in no work. So I think that was really a soul crushing moment for me as well, and made me really realize like, oh wow, like this person doesn't actually fucking care about me. What's funny though is that, as I mentioned, he tried to sleep with one of our mutual friends, and I hold nothing against her because she told me a day after we had like officially broken up, and she said, "I'm sorry that I didn't tell you this. The reason why I didn't was because when I was getting ready to, it seemed as though like whatever he had told me then, you guys had sorted it out and you looked happy, and I wasn't about to try to ruin that for you, right?" And people can turn it around and look at it in a different from a different perspective, but at the end of the day, like I'm not mad at my friend. I love her very much. I care about her so much. And I'm glad that she did tell me, at least, at least at least she did tell me, like she didn't just keep it a secret. But then he panicked and threw her under the bus and was like, "Oh, like she's from New York." And so he was like, I'm going to make an Instagram post with this to caption because I'm going to New York for my birthday. But he was like, "New York Asian ruined everything." Which I think is just so funny because like he's just so fucking awkward and like doesn't isn't able to pick up on like social cues and stuff, and it's just really embarrassing, to be honest. Like I don't even know how he has friends. I don't know how I dated him. But he then went into like, "Oh, you're like gaslighting me" mode around that time. So I was super like, haha, canon event, like super crazy first relationship, super crazy first breakup. We were all in hell basically is what it felt like. But what's funny is after I went through my little spiteful glow up, he was like, "Oh, like it's so crazy because my study abroad got canceled because of the pandemic, and so non-citizens weren't able to go into Japan. So I ended up just staying on campus for fall term." And he was there too, and he's like, "Oh my god, like it's so crazy, like I can't believe like you're not going to Japan, like that's crazy, like we could maybe try again." And I remember laughing at him, and I'm like, "I would never ever get back with you, you fucking dog." I didn't say that part, but I felt that way, right? And I'm like, they always come crawling back. Don't believe what anybody says. They always do it at least once. But also don't make yourself look like a fool begging for them. I thought that it was just really funny, but then throughout junior year, after I like rejected him and I was like, "We're never getting back together," he resorted to posting about me on his like private story and like talking about me at parties, I think, where he called me like, "Oh, I don't want to get back with him." So all of a sudden like I'm a slut and I'm a whore and like, oh, all of these things, right? And it's crazy how men will well, it's not crazy, it's kind of like expected, but like he really switched up on me as soon as he realized that like he didn't have access to me anymore and that I was going to put up with his bullshit, which I think is so fucking crazy. And I'm like, you need to learn that like not life is not always going to go your way, and you're really not, are nothing close to hot shit. If you guys saw a photo of him, you would probably think too, like, "Maggie, what the fuck were you thinking dating this guy," right? Anyways, what else is there to say? I don't know. He was talking a lot of shit about me on campus to his friends, but then like every girl that I was made aware of by mutual friends that he like hooked up with, they always looked at me funny on campus, which I thought was funny because I'm like, what is this man saying about me? because I know damn well he still stalks me on campus, and he purposely goes out of his way to make me uncomfortable. And I could have Title IX'd him, but I never ended up doing that. And I don't know why, because he was already gone for like the next term. But like, never go back to the same man, because he'll either be obsessed with you for the rest of his life, or else he will come crawling back. And that is when that's when you have all the power and you can make your decision. Like, if you really feel like you can make it work with that said person that you broke up with, then like, by all means, try again. Every situation is different. For me, I knew, I was like, fuck this guy. He never cared about me. He never loved me. Why would I get back with him? So that kind of sums up my little first freshman relationship. I don't think there is anything else that I want to touch on in this podcast. So I really hope that you enjoyed, and please expect a full layout of my hoe story from start to finish in my next podcast. I love you all so much. I want to thank you for listening, and if there's any topic that you want to hear me talk about in my next podcasts, please leave a comment down below. Please subscribe. Please leave a like. I would really appreciate it. I love interacting with you guys. And yeah, I hope you all have a good night, and I will see you in my next podcast. Bye.